Listen, man, when it comes to history, I always let y'all know that I'm not a history buff, right? And even back in the day in school, man, I might have fell asleep a time or two in history class. But it's one name, not just one name. It's a few names, but this one name always seemed to wake me right up, bro. Seriously. All right. And the name is Oppenheimer. So listen, man, this video here we about to get into, it's a very, very interesting one. All right. So if you're new, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, join the fam. And if there's ever one name that could kind of strike fear in people, it's this one. Let's get to the video.
It's been said J. Robert Oppenheimer helped save the world by giving us the power to destroy it. David Martin reports on the Manhattan Project and the complex-driven man in charge.
The world's first atomic explosion, July 16th, 1945, in the final weeks of World War II in the high desert of New Mexico.
We're at ground zero right now.
Alan Carr is the historian at the Los Alamos National Laboratory where the bomb was designed and built.
The sand melted in the fireball and rained back down to the ground, where it re-solidified in the form of the mineral that we now call trinitite.
Trinitite, after the name of the site, Trinity. Is that trinitite?
Yes, this is a piece of trinitite.
Few people laughed. Few people cried.
Recalling the moment 20 years later, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man history calls the father of the atomic bomb, said it brought to mind a line of Hindu scripture.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
I view Oppenheimer.
Just look at his look. Now, I don't know if he's reading something. I'm just telling you what it makes me feel. There's just a look on his face. Like, you have to have a special type of, you know what I mean, feeling to design something like that. That can instantly just wipe us off the map. So when I see the look, I ain't gonna lie, man. That joint gives me chills. Even them standing in the spot gives me chills.
Become death, the destroyer of worlds.
I view Oppenheimer as the most important person who ever lived. Oppenheimer's story is one of the biggest stories imaginable.
Christopher Nolan has spent the last 3 years living in Oppenheimer's world, writing and directing the movie Oppenheimer, opening this week.
I don't know if we can be trusted with such a weapon. But we have no choice.
By unleashing atomic power, he gave us the power to destroy ourselves that we've never had before. And that changes the human equation.
Nolan filmed it all using an IMAX camera.
The only IMAX film was...
Give it to anybody else but humans, bro. I feel like animals will make better and smarter decisions than some of us would make. Give it to anybody but humans, man.
Nolan filmed it all using an IMAX camera.
The only IMAX film would really be worthy of the Trinity project. And this is what an IMAX film print looks like. So it's a giant frame there.
Yeah.
That's your regular, that's a 35mm.
This is the actual film.
It's 11 miles long and it weighs 600 pounds.
Did you have qualms about what?
Wait a minute. How do you even start? Like, the person that's got to deal with that 11 miles of film, I hope he getting paid enough, bro. That's all I got to say. I hope he getting paid enough. That's a lot of film to deal with.
And it weighs 600 pounds.
Did you have qualms about what Hollywood would do to all your research?
Of course I did. Yes.
Kai Bird is co-author of a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Oppenheimer, on which the film is based.
It's complicated to take on a historic icon like Robert Oppenheimer and deal with the history faithfully and yet turn it into a cinematic experience.
For high-stakes human drama, it's hard to improve on the historical facts.
I know of no other story as dramatic as Oppenheimer and his involvement with the Manhattan Project.
All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here. Secret laboratory. Keep everyone there until it's done.
The Manhattan Project was the code name for the race to build the bomb. Played by Cillian Murphy, Oppenheimer was teaching graduate physics when he was recruited by a gruff Army general named Leslie Groves.
I don't take anything on trust.
Played by Matt Damon.
How would you proceed?
You're talking about turning theory into a practical weapon system faster than the Nazis.
Who have a 12-month head start.
18.
Oppie was then, 38 years old, never managed anything more than his graduate students, and yet Groves selected him.
What did other people think of Groves' pick?
They thought it was outlandish.
Besides his lack of experience, Oppenheimer had communist connections.
It took him a long time to get a security clearance. His own wife, Kitty, had been a member of the party for a long time.
What did Groves think of that?
He thought that Oppie was the one to lead this project, and it was a brilliant choice. He could see in Oppie the smarts and the charisma to bring all these scientists together in this secret city and make it happen.
Initially, it was believed that it would only take about 130 people to get the job done here at Los Alamos. That number grew to 1,700.
Thrown together in what was then the Nowhereville of Los Alamos, the average age of the scientists was 29.
Wow.
Boys and girls together, were there romances?
There were, and that became somewhat of a security problem here because before the project, essentially no one was born in this area. All of a sudden you've got 8, 10, 12 children being born every month. How do you hide that?
Are there traces of the person he was around here? I mean, there are a lot of martini glasses over there.
The martini.
I mean, when you mix alcohol and you got nothing but time and opportunity, what do you think is going to happen? I'm just saying.
Glasses, you'll see ashtrays.
After shooting scenes in Oppenheimer's New Mexico home, Nolan donated the furnishings he had brought in to the Los Alamos Historical Society, but without the bugs placed by security officers suspicious of Oppenheimer's politics.
Was he under surveillance in his own house?
He was being watched for much of his employment in different ways. For instance, his phone was tapped at various times, and when he would talk to Kitty, they would occasionally make reference to the fact that they were probably being listened in on.
By the time Oppenheimer was ready to test what he called the gadget, Germany had already surrendered, but Japan fought on.
This was literally life and death because of every day that was going on in the war. Thousands and thousands of more people were being killed.
The gadget was hoisted to the top of a 100-foot tower, and the countdown began.
Did he have any famous last words before the test?
Oppenheimer supposedly said, "Lord, these affairs are difficult on the heart."
Oppenheimer was in a bunker 10,000 yards from ground zero.
There is a tremendous burst of light. You would have been watching it unfold in silence for dozens and dozens of seconds before the shockwave arrived. Imagine someone firing a pistol very close to you and somebody putting a leaf blower on high right in your face.
3 weeks after the test, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Then a second one on Nagasaki.
We had split the atom. We had changed the world.
The war was over, and Oppenheimer was the most famous scientist in the world. But that is only half the story.
He shortly afterwards plunged into deep depression. I think having read some of the news accounts of what had happened actually on the ground at Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Oppenheimer had built the weapon that ended the war, but he had also created a monster, which he warned would one day cause the world to curse the names Los Alamos and Hiroshima.
If there is another world war, this civilization may go under.
The national security establishment is appalled that the father of the atomic bomb is coming out in public giving speeches against these weapons.
Louis Strauss, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, played by Robert Downey Jr., was bent on building more and bigger bombs than the Russians.
That was the problem right there. Goodness gracious. That was the problem right there. Something in my eye, y'all. They knew once that got out to the world, once that information leaked to the public, they knew what was to come. Even he knew what was to come. You know what I'm saying? So he knew that if we ever got to this point again, it was going to be bad because now everybody has this information and can do that.
Oppenheimer was in his way.
The Russians have a bomb. We're supposed to be years ahead of them, but so what were you guys doing at Los Alamos? Wasn't security tight?
Strauss managed to draw up an indictment that made it appear that Oppie's advice was politically motivated, that maybe he was a subversive, that maybe he was a secret communist, that maybe he was a spy.
Meeting behind closed doors, an Atomic Energy Commission security panel heard evidence, some of it gathered from illegal wiretaps, of Oppenheimer's communist past. They voted against him.
It's a terrible tragedy because here America's foremost scientist, a great public intellectual, is put on trial and stripped of his security clearance and then humiliated.
He retreated into academic exile at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, home of Albert Einstein, who had tried to talk Oppenheimer out of fighting a battle he couldn't win.
Oppenheimer walks away from Einstein, and Albert Einstein turns to his secretary and says, "There goes a nar," the Yiddish for fool.
Has it ever been rectified?
This past year, December 2022, the Department of Energy formally vacated the entire clearance hearing. The message there is that this shouldn't have happened.
By then, Oppenheimer had long since passed away. So he remains, as the title of his biography says, the American Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and was tortured ever after. But it's not a myth.
And they won't understand it until they've used it.
Oppenheimer was at the center of a set of events that changed the world forever. Like it or not, we still live in his world, and we always will.
Looking back now, do you think that our country's use of the bomb was necessary?
I believe that the view which I learned from many, but above all from General Marshall and from Colonel Stimson, the Secretary of War, the view that they had, that we would have to fight our way to the main islands, and that it would involve a slaughter of Americans and Japanese on a massive scale, was arrived at by them in good faith, with regret, and on the best evidence that they then had. To that alternative, I think the bomb was an enormous relief. The war had started in '39. It had seen the death of tens of millions. It had seen brutality and degradation which had no place in the middle of the 20th century. And the ending of the war by this means, certainly cruel, was not undertaken lightly. But I am not, as of today, confident that a better course was then open.
Hands just shaking hearing that, because my mind instantly tries to go back and put myself in those times, man. And listening to what he's saying of how many people were dying at the hands of this war, and how he was saying it has no place in the 20th century. We didn't need this. Something had to stop this. Something had to go on. Something had to happen. I took it upon myself, thinking about him, I took it upon myself to figure out a way. Sheesh. Could you have done it? Would you have done it? You know what I mean? Knowing how many lives you're about to, could you have done it? Even coming from his standpoint, could you have done it? It's easy for us to Monday morning quarterback it. But you're listening to the guy who actually created.
I have not a very good answer to this question.
Dr. Oppenheimer, nevertheless, with all the rationalization, with all the inevitability of the decision that history demonstrates to us, you and many like you who brought the bomb into being still seem to suffer, may I say, from a bad conscience about it. Is that true, sir?
Well, I don't want to speak for others because we're all different. I think when you play a meaningful part in bringing about the death of over 100,000 people and the injury of a comparable number, you naturally don't think of that as with ease. I believe we had a great cause to do this, but I do not think that our consciences should be entirely easy at stepping out of the part of studying nature, learning the truth about it, to change the course of human history. Long ago, I said once that in a crude sense, which no vulgarity and no humor could quite erase, the physicists had known sin. And I didn't mean by that the deaths that were caused as the result of our work. I meant that we had known the sin of pride. We had turned to affect, in what proved to be a major way, the course of man's history. We had the pride of thinking we knew what was good for man. And I do think it has left a mark on many of those who were responsibly engaged. This is not the natural business.
Was it good for man? There's a lot of people, growing up, I was often told, sometimes you can't think about the now, you got to think about the future as well. And then you hear some people say, well, you can't always think about the future. You got to live in the moment, the present. You know what I mean? And that goes heavily in decision making. So when you hear him say that, you know, I pose the question of, was it good or was it bad? For them, was it good? For us, was it good? Who makes that ultimate call? Who says what was right and what was wrong? Because people can look at that and say, well, you still took out this many people with what you did. And they can make a case and say, who gives you the right to say this many people needs to, in order to stop things? You know what I'm saying? It's always going to be somebody on both sides of it. Was it good or was it? So it's a tough that's why I said that's a tough decision to make.
Of a scientist.
You know, in the first days after Hiroshima, you pointed out that the scientists who built the bomb had nurtured the hope, really, that nuclear weapons, as you put it, would lead to new patterns of behavior. Well, why has that hope failed of realization?
Well, I think I may have said that then. I think I wrote it recently. I said two things: new patterns of behavior and new institutions. I think that when you remember the manifest causes of conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, which have bedeviled us for 20 years, and which are by no means in any conventional sense solved, when you remember the ideological ferocity that animated the post-war communists and that we see now in the Chinese and unmuted form. You think of the anti-communist ferocity with which we met this, the notion that there is a telephone communication between the White House and the Kremlin to make sure that there are no misunderstandings is a damn new pattern of behavior. I think it's something that almost without precedent in wars in conflicts which have such a total character as that between the communists and the free world has tended to have. I think the notion that the United States should be fixing up its power to fight limited engagements on the ground and in the air with old-fashioned weapons that we hope are a little better than they used to be, not as a step in conquering the world, but as a step in giving a chance to think, to pause, to argue, and to persuade before a Holocaust. That's a pattern that I believe is not familiar either. When you think that for years the intellectuals of Russia were interested in France and the United Kingdom and the United States, have gotten together to talk to each other about the problems of armament and the problems of the application of science and the problems of maintaining the peace. This also is not quite something that is familiar. The institutions are not there. The patterns are faulty, frail, very vulnerable. But there is a wind blowing.
Dr. Oppenheimer, from all that you have said, it seems that when you contemplate the future, it is more with hope than with pessimism.
Well,
Or is that an oversimplification?
Yes, I've tried to talk about the hopeful things. The unhopeful ones jump to everyone's mind. Will the Chinese change their views of human destiny and of the relations between them and us before or after they have the power to make major nuclear war? It's anybody's guess. Will the détente between the Russians and the West survive the strains of this time? Will they survive what's going on in Asia today? We don't know. There are 100 reasons for seeing no hope at all. And
See, that sounds to me like a guy living in the present moment. You know, I had to do something now. I had to, and will this affect the future? Probably so, possibly in a negative way. They now have this, or will they have nuclear, like all of that type of stuff. But he sounds to me like I had to do what I had to do for the present moment. We had to do what we had to do for the present moment. I could listen to this dude talk all day, to be honest with you.
I take it for granted that everybody can think of them without being reminded. It's harder to think of anything on the other side, and I have tried to say that however frail and however tentative and however limited, they do exist, and they look to me like a bridgehead to a livable future, but not without work.
Again, I can listen to him speak all day, bro. Oppenheimer. Seriously, man. I know y'all wasn't expecting this, but I just thought this would be super interesting to cover and talk about, man. You know what I'm saying? I don't think we've covered him on the channel before, so I was super excited to bring it and talk about it because I know y'all probably have heard and have talked about maybe with grandparents and stuff like that. I didn't have that opportunity to do that, and maybe the next time my grandma's down here, I'll see what she was doing, or what was her take on it back then, or what was going on around where she lived back then, and hopefully she has some, or maybe she doesn't. But for those of y'all who do get to have those conversations, man, cherish that stuff, bro. That's history. You know what I'm saying? That's history. So y'all get at me in the comment section, man. Let me know what you thought of this. Till next one, I'm gone. Peace.